Show me a man that's not a hypocrite, and I'll shit gold. Hypocrite, the Greek word for an actor. In a time when society values internet dunking, social clout, falsified projection of reality, and anonymous feedback, we've lost touch with what it means to be human. We obsess over these new systems so much that we've turned a blind eye to our core belief systems. We're so hyper-focused on the performance of life through internet presence that we'll do anything to betray our reality, so long as it reaches more people. A recent example I can recall of this was Candace Owens assassinating the character of George Floyd. The most cop-out, internet-minded conclusion to come to with Owens is one stated by none other than Snoop Dogg, that she is part of the bunch. Though I find this conclusion childish and useless, admittedly, it did make me laugh. Regardless, we can look at it through the scope of her belief system, Christianity. On the Joe Rogan podcast, Owens complained about the distancing of American society from Christianity, claiming that a large part of what's wrong with society is the lack of biblical teaching. Through this lens, we can view Jesus as the prime example of what to strive for as a human, selfless and devout to not only God, but also the concept of redemption. Jesus befriended the outcasts of society, was therefore labeled as such, and then inspired and empowered these people so much that the state had him crucified. Candace's critique of George Floyd completely misses this connection between George and a figure like Jesus. She criticized the BLM movement for making him a martyr solely because of his past, a past filled with activities that the state deemed worthy of being outcast. But why did Candace say this? She's not stupid. The short answer, divisiveness sells. We'll get into that later, though. Unfortunately, a lack of empathy is a large discrepancy with religious conservative types. They have a hard time accepting the downtrodden of society unless they comply with their set of rules, or of course, they're homeless. When people on the right claim that the devaluing of marriage and faith is the problem with society, they only really seek to put a tiny band-aid on a gaping wound, a form of sweeping it under the rug. Just do what we did, and you'll be fine. Imagine for a moment, you have no knowledge of medicine, and you have a cold. You hear a recovery story of someone else your age from your village and learn that you just need to drink plenty of fluids and sleep it off. Your child years later has a bug. You assume it's the same as your cold, but it's not. You tell them they'll be fine if they drink enough fluids and sleep, but your child suffers, never recovering. This seems to be the conservative approach to finding solutions. From what I can gather, they generally value the numbing agencies of religion and not the more significant, harder questions its texts raise. But it's not just conservatives that are entirely out of touch with their core beliefs. It's everyone. We're all filthy hypocrites. The majority of the Twitter mob leans towards social justice. In general, it seems that humanitarian issues are represented by the left. And increasingly enough, I think it has more in common with its contender of Christian ideals than they'd like to admit. And just like Christians, they don't seek common grounds. They seek out crucifixion, burning of bridges, and building a long list of enemies. In recent times, cancel culture has spread like wildfire. It is a compelling case because it isn't a matter of left or right. It's a wide range of mobs from all corners of the political spectrum and all walks of life. Neo-Nazis, communists, anarchists, furries, non-binaries, production delays canceling the Power Rangers live show in 2017. The dictionary.com definition of cancel culture reads, cancel culture refers to the popular practice of withdrawing support for canceling public figures and companies after they have done or said something considered objectionable or offensive. Cancel culture is generally discussed as being performed on social media in the form of group shaming. Notice the words popular, performed, and social media. Cancel culture is, in a way, a form of performance, not by a single individual, but by an entity, a collective conscience that has taken a life of its own. And before you go and say, I'm not performing, just consider this, the strength of the subconscious. To better understand this, we must review the way social media functions. Social media is, in some sense, an interactive money-making algorithm, one that appears to be free on the surface but costs endless hours of human existence. For the Twitters and Facebooks of the world to be lucrative, they require large amounts of users to prove to the wealth holders of the world that investing money on advertisements through said platform is a good use of resources. So how do these platforms provide these numbers? To get you hooked. First, you create a platform that gives one small sliver of utility to the people. Keep in contact with your college roommate, share photos of your children with your grandparents from across the country, connect with people who share the same interests as you. Then you make it interactive and flashy, the same way a slot machine is. Sound effects, flashing icons, and a small chance of profiting off the platform. A form of gambling your time and effort. A person that puts massive amounts of cash into a slot machine has a much higher chance of winning than someone with $20. A more substantial sum does not change the built-in probability of whatever game you're playing, but it gives more leg room for a comeback. Social media profiting is based on the number of eyes you bring to the platform. The more value and eyes you bring to their platform, the higher your chances of endorsement. Even still, getting clicks doesn't guarantee anything for you. They're even straight to the point with the ability to buy views directly from the platform. The gamble being that you may find a new fan, get a few clicks, maybe even a purchase of your product if you're fortunate. These platforms all have algorithms meant to keep the user glued to the screen no matter what their interests are. They sift through the user's tastes, ask questions when the user signs up, what interests you? And often, through more invasive means such as scanning your keychain for keywords and listening to your conversations through the microphone on your cell phone. They then feed you material based on this information. Because all of these algorithms are entangled in a dopamine feedback loop, it knows what we want, and we can't help but come back for more. The small jolt of energy we get from our post-receiving interaction is quite addictive. And while we come back again and again for a hit, the algorithm takes note of the advertisements and user posts that we click, and uses this information to fine-tune what we see. One way to get more interactions is to perform, give the algorithm what it wants, or perhaps exaggerate our perspective and often shock others. The most profitable products are the absurdly divisive ones. You can't be okay with them. You have to either hate them or love them, and either way, everyone's talking about them. Social media turns humans into these divisive products. Like drug addicts, we subconsciously attempt to contort ourselves to justify it in any way possible. As much as we like to tell ourselves that we aren't performative on social media, the design does incentivize this type of behavior. And much like the film They Live, if we strip back our veil of perspective, with our dope reality-revealing sunglasses, of course, we can see how hollow and mind-numbing it all is. We carry a monitoring system on us at all times, and from our pockets, it hears us go through our days begrudgingly. It almost knows we need an outlet, and without a second thought, it presents us our targets. Cancel culture is a byproduct of this web of algorithms we've all reluctantly dived into, a form of cyber street justice that blips out dopamine waves to an angry mob. It has no unifying foundation in terms of ideology. It is entirely built on deep disgust and anger, a human reaction with no core belief. It burns through reality like a forest fire, and no one is safe from its fiery wrath. Eventually, it eats itself like an Ouroboros and is reborn elsewhere. You can be canceled for almost anything. It's comical. The sad reality, though, is the origins of this trend. Women who had experienced trauma began tweeting out Me Too to wake the world up to the reality of rape as an unfortunately steady reality for a vast majority of the female population, and to unify them anonymously as victims. When something interesting happened, the algorithm took over. Within weeks, it had turned from a way of raising awareness and solidarity into a more visceral revenge. Fast forward to now, any actual issue has been watered down by anonymous users digging up tweets celebrities had written at the absurdly confusing age of 15. Angry video gamers are assassinating the characters of females that have prominent voices in the video game development community, effectively forcing them into walking on eggshells and burning them at the stake when the inevitable crunch sounds. The trans and non-binary community drags a popular trans creative for having a differing opinion on pronouns. Every white man with a following of moderate to large scale that said anything slightly hinting at their whiteness blasted on display for the world to see. forcing anyone connected to them to sever ties. Where's the progress? Where's the unifying cause? Is anything and everything upsetting worthy of public humiliation? I find it interesting how people sever ties in these moments. They aren't moments of solidarity. They're simply ways of avoiding the mob themselves. These corporations don't withdraw their advertisements to stand against anything. They don't post black squares because they're concerned for the black community. They do it because they are just as flawed as anything else. They do it because they rely heavily on social media outlets for customers, and these feelings of outrage reign supreme. The customer is always right. It seems the only real connection between all of these cases is the thing that fuels these platforms: popularity. Even on a local scale, the people canceled have to be in some position of power. But it's not just this so-called power, it's power through a public platform. It wouldn't perform nearly as well within the constructs of the algorithm otherwise. We rarely, if ever, cancel some unknown person with a degree in law that makes mistakes. We cancel public performers or the people working for them as a bizarre form of interactive, collaborative performance with a high chance of setting off our algorithmic dopamine loops. Effectively, this form of cyber justice does nothing to address real problems. It sweeps them under the rug. This sweeping sensation will cause even more devastating results than the problem had to begin with. It's like sweeping food crumbs into a corner behind the fridge. Sooner or later, the ants will appear. You can't suppress humanity's darker side for long before it starts to crop its head up in the most disgusting ways imaginable. We know when you begin to restrain the smaller, nearly benign bad qualities of a human through public humiliation, they tend to mutate and grow sinister. And just look at how we handle quote-unquote problem children in school. We send them to the office in an attempt to humiliate them. We don't care if they find a healthy outlet for that energy. We just want them to shut up, to maintain some semblance of order in the classroom. When it's all said and done, and the child has only gotten worse, we just look back and wonder how they, quote-unquote, fell through the cracks. Often, the critique against anti-cancel mindsets is this: you don't believe in accountability. But they've clearly never heard of a little group called Alcoholics Anonymous, with a significant emphasis on anonymous, because accountability doesn't have a public performative tendency. It seeks to hold people accountable so they can grow from their mistakes and hopefully realize that our errors happen as some design of higher purpose. Maybe the solution for cancel culture is a broadcasted redemption arc, where we can root for the canceled to move on and better themselves, full of heart-wrenching performances, and of course, littered with ads for shitty phone games. We can't miss out on the chance of profits. And in all honesty, I think a lot of great has come from this public accountability and encouragement of coming forward. Weinstein and Epstein are perfect examples. But Johnny McChicken at the local bar throwing back a couple of gin and tonics and calling you hot tits does not equate to multi-billion-dollar child sex trafficking ring. One of my favorite cases of canceling, and I feel dirty saying favorite in regards to people attempting to ruin someone's life, is comedian Hannibal Buress getting canceled for becoming a property owner and securing wealth for him and his family. Hannibal is black, and by the very definition of equity, the supposed thing these cancelers claim to seek for the black community, his obtaining of property is a massive success for all of us. But no, Hannibal doesn't deserve this hard-earned position in life. His life's work has been rendered non-existent. The years of endless touring, filming multiple seasons of Eric Andre's show, opening for Mitch Hedberg 20 years ago, doing open mics to crowds of unamused people, and honing his craft is forgotten. He is reduced to an evil man sitting lazily on his ass, collecting passive income, now a supposed part of the problem. There's a sanction of cancel types that align with the ideas of socialism. In the case of Hannibal, the ownership of private property and making passive income off of this property is worthy of being cast away from society, even when that person comes from the community most affected by the inequities of capitalist society. Let's consider the life of Marx. He reportedly wasn't set in his beliefs. They were ever-changing. At one point, he even believed that it wasn't humans to blame for the unevenness of wealth distribution. It was a system that had taken on a life of its own. He was born into a bourgeoisie family. Marx even participated in the London Stock Exchange while writing Das Kapital. The dude was profoundly flawed and hypocritical. This internal struggle is why he was so great, though. He dreamt of something new. Marx stumbled his way through his ideas, often landing on the very thought-provoking ones that still haunt us to this day. Marx did this all while maintaining his essence of humanity, his flaws. He was just as cancelable as anyone else. He cheated on his wife, with whom he had several children, and in a quote that wildly dates him, he asked, "Is it a misfortune that magnificent California was seized from the lazy Mexicans who did not know what to do with it?" Marx, a womanizer and a racist. Perhaps we should cancel all Marxist thoughts. In comparison to a man of deep thought, such as Marx, it seems that these cancel types are too set in their ways ever to make mistakes of their own, therefore unable to make discoveries or build new concepts. Another characteristic they share in common with Christian conservatives. And even like an Episcopalian soccer mom, they only hide their flaws through the moral high ground of pointing everyone else's out. No human is free of mistakes, which leads me to a bizarre feeling. Even after all this piling on about cancel culture, I can't help but feel for them. Revenge is sweet. I've indeed sought after it in my life. Whether it's a chain of back and forth cheating with a partner, or obsessively focusing on how Jason gave you that backhanded compliment about how you were too lit that just rubbed you wrong. Now you spend months fantasizing about how you're going to get him back. Maybe even the occasional fist fight with a sibling over a disagreement, or drunkenly at a bar with strangers eyeing you wrong. I've certainly made my fair share of cancelable mistakes, and have an infinite supply of cancelable thoughts, many I can't even say out loud. But the difference between making my mistakes in person and seeing the reactions firsthand is this. I must live with my shame through the perspective of the friends and family that surrounded me during these mistakes. People in these internet communities, often that's all they have. And I'd wager they're canceling because they're ashamed of their own past experiences, whether it be by the hands of others or by their own hands inflicted onto others. And that's something I think we should all consider. Even the people that don't get canceled, their souls are being eaten away by the shame they carry with them every day. The angry mob is merely a reflection of everyone else surrounding it. We're all fucked up. While we continue to exaggerate our character online, we grow further and further away from the person that inspired that exaggeration in the first place. We are all actors, products on a manufacturing line, sifting through societal quality control, hypocrites being bred and molded against all natural inclinations into the perfect cog in a beautifully tuned capitalist machine. Pseudomorals are now just another function of an ever-growing multi-billion-dollar industry, as am I. Regardless of our dopaminergic pathways connection to this instant sushi conveyor belt serving us neatly packaged outrage, we're all unified in our hypocrisy, imperfection, and our never-waning capacity to make mistakes. Unfortunately, we carry this notion of having the absolute correct view and the desire to be on the right side of history. Worst of all, this notion of moral high ground is only used as fuel by the biggest hypocrites on the planet. Politicians. Every 4 years in America, we have to pick a new body snatcher draped in a fucking veil of lies, pretending to care about issues just to get elected. Newsflash, they don't care about anybody but them goddamn selves. Politicians prey on our fears, and they'll have us more scared than ever of repeating history. Swine, all of them. But perhaps this is one of my biggest hypocrisies, for within the same paragraph, I said we were all unified by our hypocrisy, and then cast judgment on a shadowy group of men in suits. Fuck, I even spent minutes criticizing cancel culture, and then essentially said cancel politicians, they suck dick. Nevertheless, one might speculate that the repeating of history is inevitable, that history is merely a loop of story arcs with an ever-changing stage. We'd like to think that we can predict the second coming of Hitler, but we can't, and we never will. Hitler felt disenfranchised, a feeling we all have from time to time. If we try hard enough, we can tie any aspect of his past to the entirety of existence. An example, Hitler was a failed artist, therefore all failed artists are dangerous. We'll never really know until it's too late. We seem to insist on both sides of this country that pushing different opinions further away is a moral obligation, whether out of fear of repeating the haunting, disturbing mistakes of our ancestors, or for a mere bump of shallow superiority. We can criticize every aspect of the Trump campaign, making connections between the aesthetics or his rhetoric to Hitler's. Still, we can't even consider that a country divided is more easily controlled by a fascist dictator, and we continue each day to split amongst ourselves. We cannot learn from history. We can't even agree on it. Every recollection of the past is steeped deeply in perspective and bias, not to mention the human brain's capacity to recall stories is far from perfect. In The Mind Explained, they interview a woman that was quote-unquote in New York during 9/11 when the two planes slammed into the Twin Towers. She recollected seeing the smoke billowing across the water. When she brought up the story with her mother, she replied, "No, in 2001 I was working in Connecticut." Yet her daughter could have sworn she was there in person. Memories aren't reliable, yet we think we can learn from history, a collection of memories told through perspectives injected with the individual's bias and nuance. Imagine never knowing what a dartboard is, being blindfolded, having someone explain how to play darts to you, and then expecting to hit a bullseye. One might argue that we can't learn through others' experiences. Wisdom is too far removed from reality to learn from it. In fact, it's when you finally make that mistake on your own that you may recall the advice you never really understood. It clicks at that moment. Oh, that's what they meant. And so I say again, we're all hypocrites. We're all actors, wearing a mask, always hiding the unspeakable sides of ourselves from daylight. The new stage we've set in this world accentuates us in a rapidly growing technological state. Some of us play the role of an angry mob member. Some of us play the role of the crucified. Maybe even just the innocent bystander. Regardless of how we view our parts in this twisted play, the root of all of them is the want for something greater. All we need do is turn around and see the trails we've left behind, and see the places we've come from, the personal goals we've achieved, the mistakes we've made. Once we've accepted our past mistakes and learned from them, it's time to have a drink and move forward towards the next set. We then rinse and repeat. Finally, after several iterations of this painful learning loop, we can return to dust, eternal nothingness, an empty void, peaceful, blissful.